What if I told you that 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta invented the first battery, ancient craftsmen in Baghdad might have already cracked the code of electricity? What if the secrets of galvanic power weren't discovered in 1800 Italy, but in the workshops of ancient Mesopotamia, where skilled artisans may have been electroplating jewellery and powering mysterious devices while the Roman Empire was still expanding? Today, we're diving into one of archaeology's most controversial discoveries, an artifact so puzzling that it challenges everything we think we know about ancient technology. This is the story of the Baghdad Battery. Picture this. It's 1936. The world is on the brink of war. But in the dusty streets of Baghdad, German archaeologist Wilhelm König is about to stumble upon something that will ignite debates for the next century. But before we get to that moment, let's set the scene. We're talking about ancient Baghdad, not the medieval city of the Abbasid Caliphate, but something much older. The area König was excavating dates back to the Parthian period, roughly 250 BCE to 250 CE. This was a time when the mighty Parthian Empire controlled the crossroads between East and West, when Silk Road traders carried treasures from China to Rome, and when craftsmen in this region were renowned for their metalworking skills. The Parthians weren't just warriors, they were innovators. They developed new techniques in metallurgy, created intricate jewellery, and established trade networks that spanned continents. Their capital, Ctesiphon, was one of the largest cities in the world, rivaling Rome itself in grandeur and sophistication. This is crucial context, because what König found wasn't just any artifact. It was discovered in a region famous for its advanced metalworking. The question is, just how advanced were they? Wilhelm König was no amateur treasure hunter. He was a trained archaeologist and the director of the National Museum of Iraq. In 1936, while cataloguing artifacts in the museum's collection, he came across something that stopped him cold. The object was small, unremarkable at first glance. A clay jar, about 5 inches tall, with a narrow neck sealed with asphalt. But when König examined it more closely, he found something extraordinary inside. Protruding from the cork was a thin iron rod, completely surrounded by a copper cylinder. The iron rod showed clear signs of corrosion, specifically the kind of corrosion you'd expect from galvanic action. The copper cylinder was held in place by more asphalt, creating what appeared to be a sealed system. König had studied enough about electrochemistry to recognise what he was looking at. This wasn't just random pieces of metal stuck in a jar. This was a configuration remarkably similar to a galvanic cell, what we call a battery today. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. This wasn't the only one. König discovered that the museum housed several similar artifacts, all from the same general region and time period. Some were in better condition than others, but they all shared the same basic design: clay vessel, iron rod, copper cylinder, asphalt sealant. The more König studied these artifacts, the more convinced he became that he was looking at something revolutionary. In 1938, he published his theory in a paper that would launch 1,000 debates. These weren't just storage vessels or religious artifacts. They were ancient batteries. Think about what this means for a moment. If König was right, these humble clay jars represented electrical technology that predated Volta's battery by over 1,800 years. We're talking about a time when the rest of the world was still figuring out basic metallurgy. And here in ancient Baghdad, craftsmen may have been harnessing the power of electricity. Now, Koenig's theory was explosive, but it was still just that, a theory. The real game changer came in 1978, when German Egyptologist Arne Egebrecht decided to put the Baghdad Battery to the ultimate test. Egebrecht and his team at the Roma and Pelizaeus Museum in Hildesheim created exact replicas of the artifacts. They used the same materials, clay, iron, copper and asphalt, and filled them with grape juice as an electrolyte, since that would have been readily available in ancient times. The results were stunning. The replica batteries produced approximately 1.1 volts of electricity. That might not sound like much in our world of lithium-ion batteries, but it was enough to power small devices, and more importantly, it was enough to electroplate metal. Here's where the story gets really fascinating. Egebrecht's team used their replica batteries to electroplate a silver figurine with gold in just 2 hours. The process worked flawlessly, creating a thin, even layer of gold that was virtually identical to examples found in ancient Mesopotamian artifacts. This was a breakthrough moment. For decades, archaeologists had puzzled over how ancient craftsmen achieved such precise, thin layers of gold plating on jewellery and decorative objects. The techniques seemed too advanced for the available technology, but if they had access to electrical current, suddenly it all made sense. But the experiments didn't stop there. In 2005, students at Smith College replicated the Baghdad Battery experiment and achieved similar results. They generated 4 volts by connecting several batteries in series, enough power to light a small LED bulb. The electrical output was real, measurable, and reproducible. But here's the million-dollar question. Just because these artifacts could function as batteries, does that mean they were batteries? This is where our mystery really begins to unfold. Because while the electrical experiments were successful, they also raised more questions than they answered. If these were batteries, what were they powering? Why haven't we found any evidence of electrical devices from this period? And why are there only a handful of these artifacts when you'd expect to find many more if they were commonly used? Some researchers have suggested that the batteries might have been used for electroplating, but others point out that ancient craftsmen had other methods for applying thin layers of gold, methods that didn't require electricity. Fire gilding, for instance, was a well-known technique that could achieve similar results. Then there's the question of knowledge preservation. If ancient Baghdad had electrical technology, where did that knowledge go? Why didn't it spread to other civilizations? Why don't we see any progression or development of this technology in the archaeological record? These questions have kept the Baghdad Battery controversy alive for decades. And the more we dig into the evidence, the more complex the picture becomes. Not everyone bought into the battery theory, and for good reason. As the initial excitement wore off, skeptical archaeologists began proposing alternative explanations that were, frankly, much more mundane. The most widely accepted alternative theory is that these artifacts were simply storage vessels for scrolls. The iron rod, in this interpretation, would have been used to hold papyrus or parchment scrolls, while the copper cylinder provided protection from insects and moisture. The asphalt sealant would have kept the contents dry and secure. This theory makes a lot of sense when you consider the context. Ancient Mesopotamia was a centre of learning and record keeping. Libraries and archives were common, and preserving important documents was a constant challenge in the desert climate. A sealed clay jar with metal components would have been an excellent way to store valuable scrolls. Another theory suggests these were religious or ceremonial objects. Some archaeologists point out that the combination of different metals, iron and copper, held symbolic significance in ancient Mesopotamian culture. Iron was associated with strength and durability, while copper was linked to beauty and divine power. The artifacts might have been used in religious ceremonies or buried as offerings to the gods. There's also the possibility that these were simply examples of ancient metallurgy experiments. Craftsmen in this region were constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible with metal. These artifacts might represent attempts to create new alloys or test the properties of different metal combinations. But here's what's interesting about these alternative theories. None of them adequately explain the specific configuration of the artifacts. Why use iron and copper specifically? Why seal them with asphalt? Why the particular proportions and arrangements? Dr. Paul Craddock, a metallurgy expert at the British Museum, has pointed out that while these alternatives are possible, they don't account for all the evidence. The galvanic corrosion on the iron rods, for instance, is exactly what you'd expect to see if these objects had been used as batteries. The truth is, we may never know for certain what these artifacts were originally intended for. But that's part of what makes them so fascinating. They sit at the intersection of archaeology, chemistry, and historical speculation, challenging us to think differently about ancient capabilities. So where does the archaeological community stand on the Baghdad Battery today? The answer is complicated. Most mainstream archaeologists remain skeptical of the battery theory. The lack of supporting evidence, no electrical devices, no written records of electrical knowledge, no progression of the technology, makes it difficult to accept that these were functional batteries in any meaningful sense. Dr. Marjorie Senecal, a science historian at Smith College, puts it this way: the fact that something can function as a battery doesn't mean it was designed to be a battery. Context is everything in archaeology. However, there's a growing recognition that we may have underestimated ancient technological capabilities. Recent discoveries have shown that ancient civilizations were far more sophisticated than previously thought. The Antikythera mechanism, for instance, revealed that ancient Greeks had mechanical computers. Roman concrete has turned out to be more durable than modern concrete. Ancient Damascus steel possessed properties that modern metallurgy is still trying to replicate. In this context, the Baghdad Battery doesn't seem quite so impossible. Dr. Arne Egerbrecht, who conducted the original replication experiments, remained convinced until his death that these artifacts represented genuine ancient electrical technology. He argued that the absence of supporting evidence doesn't prove the technology didn't exist. It might simply mean we haven't found the right sites or recognized the right clues. There's also the intriguing possibility that these artifacts represent a technological dead end, a brief flowering of electrical knowledge that was lost due to war, plague, or cultural disruption. Ancient history is full of lost technologies, from Greek fire to Roman concrete formulations. Recent chemical analysis has provided new insights into the artifacts. Advanced spectrographic analysis has confirmed that the metals show signs of galvanic corrosion, and isotope analysis has revealed that the copper came from mines in the Caucasus region, the same area where some of the world's earliest metalworking took place. But perhaps the most important modern perspective comes from experimental archaeology. Researchers continue to replicate and test these artifacts, not just to prove whether they work as batteries, but to understand what they can tell us about ancient knowledge systems and technological development. The Baghdad Battery remains one of archaeology's most fascinating puzzles. Whether these 2,000-year-old clay jars were actually batteries, scroll containers, or something else entirely, they've forced us to reconsider what we think we know about ancient technology. Maybe the real lesson here isn't about whether ancient Baghdad had electricity. Maybe it's about the danger of underestimating human ingenuity. Throughout history, people have been solving problems with whatever materials and knowledge they had available. Sometimes those solutions were more sophisticated than we give them credit for. The Baghdad Battery reminds us that the march of technology isn't always linear. Knowledge can be lost, rediscovered, and lost again. Innovations can appear in unexpected places and times. And sometimes, the most extraordinary discoveries are hiding in plain sight in museum storage rooms. So what do you think? Are we looking at evidence of ancient electrical technology, or are we seeing patterns that aren't really there? Could the craftsmen of ancient Baghdad have been experimenting with forces they didn't fully understand, accidentally creating batteries while pursuing other goals? The mystery of the Baghdad Battery isn't just about archaeology, it's about the limits of human knowledge and the endless capacity for innovation. And in a world where we're constantly surrounded by electrical devices, maybe it's fitting that we're still puzzling over whether our ancestors beat us to the punch by 2 millennia. Let me know in the comments what you think. Are you team ancient battery, or do you think there's a simpler explanation? And if you enjoyed diving into this archaeological mystery, make sure to subscribe, because we've got plenty more historical puzzles to explore together. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about the past. You never know what secrets are waiting to be rediscovered.